Not every player is having the best training camp so far. We'll tell you who the biggest losers are coming out of training camp on this edition of the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Madjuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As the playoffs wind down, the sports stop sporting the way we'd like them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. And joining me today, as always, is Kate Madjuk. You can follow her on Twitter at Kate Madjuk. You can also read her at Yahoo Fantasy. On today's show, we're discussing some of the biggest losers coming out of week 2 of the training camp practices. And Kate, this one, it really, really hurts my heart anytime we have to talk about Kyle Pitts. But Kyle Pitts, one of the biggest losers from the first couple of weeks of practices.
Now, here's the thing. I do want to say there have been some mixed messages about Kyle Pitts. So I want to shout out one specific aspect of Kyle Pitts' training camp that has me concerned. And this is something that I think has flown a little bit under the radar because there have been comments, that this is the best training camp Kyle Pitts has ever had, which again, that's really what you would like to see, right? You want to see that he is making progress. It sounds by all accounts that he is fully healthy finally. But in a report coming out of The Athletic, there was a note about Kyle Pitts' conditioning. As much as anybody on the offense, tight end Kyle Pitts has been breathing heavily during practice. Part of that's because he's getting a ton of work and more than he did with Arthur Smith. But a part of it is he's still working himself into his best shape. Tight ends coach said, Kevin Koger said, you can see the play speed getting better. Now, when he gets tired, that's when we need to lock in and make sure we're focusing on the little details. I don't love to hear that, despite there's again, I want to stress that like the general sentiment coming out of Falcons training camp has been positive regarding Kyle Pitts, but conditioning is kind of key. Like if we're going to have Kyle Pitts running as many routes as we expect him to and being utilized with so much versatility, like we're going to need him to be in the hashtag best shape of his life.
I agree. It's just, I was really excited about Kyle Pitts, coming into the best shape of his life. He was healthy. I remember he's been dealing with a knee injury really the last 2 years. And my concern is that if he's not in great shape and the conditioning is poor, then he might not be a full-time player. He might be a 70% player, right? And it's just going to limit his opportunities, Kate. That's all.
The question is Kyle Pitts at a 70% availability? Like, how much does that differ from a guy that like maybe plays more of that traditional inline tight end? He's on the field 90% of snaps. Like Kyle Pitts playing 70% of snaps, they're probably mostly running routes. So like how much does that differ from a more traditional tight end? And honestly, like maybe we see the role increase, maybe we see his conditioning improve. Like again, this is a brand new offense, one that is very different from what they were, doing under Arthur Smith. So like maybe this is a circumstance where, okay, you have a little bit more time under Zach Robinson getting into this system, which is going to be a higher play volume and playing a little bit faster. Like you assume that he's going to adapt.
You would assume. I just, when it comes to the tight end position, a lot of these tight ends are grouped so closely together, Kate, that I'm looking for any bit of news to separate them inside of a tier. And unfortunately, it raised my eyebrows, right? It's like, oh,
yes,
this is not ideal. And it's
I
not, I'm
think
not
that's
saying,
probably the best way to put this or to frame this news. It's not that you see this report and you say, all right, I have to be totally out on Kyle Pitts. But
no,
I do
no.
think it's something that can give you a moment of pause. And again, you just kind of look at that and say, well, I know we're seeing a lot of positive reports, like cool, great plays that Pitts is making. He looks to be, much healthier than before. All of those are good things, but the conditioning definitely raises eyebrows.
And to me, it's just like, okay, Kyle Pitts is being drafted at tight end 6 right now, 51 overall. Brock Bowers being drafted as pick 48, tight end 5. They're pretty close. I mean, they're being drafted within the same half round. If I'm reading this news, it's like I just would rather have Bowers, right? And maybe the gap is starting to widen a little bit. I want to see. I'm curious, Kate, to see, does Kyle Pitts play at all in the preseason? Like, do they get him out there just to try to get him some confidence? Maybe things improve over the next month. He still has 4 weeks to get himself in better shape. But I wonder if the knee injury that he's had over the last 2 years has affected his conditioning, where he can only work out so long or so hard on it before he has to take a break. And that's why the conditioning is poor. If that is the case, then I'm really going to be out on Kyle Pitts in 2024, because it feels like a matter of time before he's going to have to sit, or he's going to have to, there's going to be games where he plays 4 snaps and then he's on the sideline for 2 quarters. As much as I love Kyle Pitts, as much as I love him, I'm just really nervous.
I'm not probably as nervous. Again, I think this is a piece of news we need to digest, but I'm not probably as nervous as you, because let's say like Kyle Pitts with a lack of conditioning, probably still better than most NFL tight ends out there with his level of athleticism, but like it doesn't help any of the things that have historically been a problem for Kyle Pitts. 5th percentile separation percentage, 5th percentile yards after the catch per reception last year per PFF. Wasn't great in terms of contested catch percentage, 22nd percentile. So like that's especially not great considering the separation hasn't been there. And again, the one thing you're going to go back to over and over again, 2nd percentile among tight ends in catchable target rate. You are going to expect that to improve in a big way with Kirk Cousins under center. But again, you just don't love to hear the reports that like Kyle Pitts isn't conditioned when we finally get this man a quarterback.
I know. And again, a lot of this can change. Maybe over the next 2 weeks, we get some reports. Hey, the conditioning's better. He's making a bunch of plays. It just took him a couple of weeks to get in shape for the season. So again, not moving him out of where he's being drafted, not moving him out of tight end 6. I was hoping for some better news, Kate. That's all.
Yeah, just keep an eye on it.
All right. Let's talk about a running back from the 2023 draft who is already in the doghouse. Let's talk about Kendre Miller next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Listen, I love sports. I love them so much that I never want them to stop. There's nothing better, and I mean nothing better, than after a long day sitting on the couch and turning on a game. It's just so relaxing and therapeutic. But unfortunately, with the playoffs winding down, we just have fewer and fewer games to watch, and the sports aren't sporting the way that we'd like them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime that I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right, there's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. Get daily insights to the best fantasy draft strategies so that you can win your league this season. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, Kate, let's talk about Kendre Miller, who a lot of people liked coming out of TCU in the 2023 draft. A lot of people were excited to draft him last year. And then after a rough rookie season, I thought there would be some year 2 hype. Hasn't really been the case.
Now let's like preface his rookie season, because I do think there's some context they're missing that like we just probably didn't have as much at the time. But Kendre Miller was very much not healthy in his rookie season, and I think that played a big part into a lot of the inefficiencies, missed time throughout the season. And when he came back for the final game of the season, was actually pretty productive and looked like the running back that we saw in his final season at TCU. He posted in that season, 2022 at TCU, just under 1,400 rushing yards, 17 touchdowns, some work on the in the air as well, culminating in a 1,500 scrimmage yard season, 17 touchdowns. Like, dude was totally dominant. And it did not translate in year 1. But again, I think a big part of that was the health component. But what I don't love is that throughout the offseason, and especially here now in training camp, we've been getting some not so exciting reports here from head coach Dennis Allen, who's made comments about his inability to stay healthy, which you don't love that. And almost like an insinuation with those comments that like maybe he could be taking better care of himself and he would remain healthy. Like that was kind of like the insinuation that I drew from those comments from Dennis Allen. He said, he can be a big play guy, but we want to see that consistently, which implies that they're not seeing the guy that Kendre Miller is consistently. Now the team has issued their first initial depth chart for the preseason, and Jamal Williams, who, by the way, like, as bad as Kendre Miller's season was last year, Jamal Williams, despite coming off a year where he led the league in rushing touchdowns, like Jamal Williams averaged 2.9 yards per attempt. And this is the dude beating out Kendre Miller on the depth chart. I love Kendre Miller and I'm a big believer in his potential, but yikes. I do not like to see this. I'm officially panicked.
Yeah, and listen, we talked about on yesterday's show. Please go back and listen to some camp winners. We talked about Taysom Hill and how the Saints are really leaning into the Taysom Hill experience. I wonder if that's because Kendre Miller hasn't stepped up, right? Like if Alvin Kamara is going to be your quote unquote passing down back, right? And I think you can use Jamal Williams as like a short yardage back or like a between the tackles grinder, right? And maybe Taysom Hill is your goal line back. He's doing some more stuff in the backfield, which Nick Underwood reported. It just feels like Kendre Miller is getting squeezed out of this backfield. And I kind of don't want any part of it. I was telling you before the show, I had a draft last night, a salary cap draft, where I had a chance to grab Kendre Miller at $0 for the next 3 years. And I passed on him just because I think there is a better than 0% chance that he's just not on this roster by week 1 of the 2024 season. I wouldn't be surprised if the Saints move on. They want somebody that maybe can help out more on special teams, that's healthier, that can be a little bit more dynamic. It just seems like this Kendre Miller thing isn't going to happen with the Saints.
See, I wasn't of the mindset that like he might not make the roster. That scares me even more. But I mean, Jamal, here's the thing. Like, you invested a 3rd round pick in the guy just last year. His first season was riddled with injury. You have to write that off. I get like maybe he hasn't come along as quickly, but I feel like that's pretty quick to throw away this 3rd round draft capital guy who, like, when you look at the depth chart here, Jamal Williams, 29 years old, right? Alvin Kamara, who,
I know,
like, also 29 years old, but like his contract is this big looming problem over the franchise right now in terms of their salary cap problems. I think that is, I do think that moving on from Kendre Miller this quickly would not be advantageous to them.
Well, what if you trade him? What if you could get back like a 5th or 6th round pick on?
What if you trade him to the Dallas Cowboys? Suddenly,
well,
my man,
I mean, I'm not thinking that.
He's a top 15 running back.
Is he though?
I'm sorry, Kendre Miller with the Dallas Cowboys. Yes.
Right now, Kendre Miller on Dynasty League Football. Now, again, this is July ADP, was RB 41. I want you to predict, once we get the August ADP, where do you think Kendre Miller is going to be drafted among running backs?
RB 60.
So right now, RB 60 is Antonio Gibson. Would you rather have Antonio Gibson or Kendre Miller?
I'll take Kendre Miller at that point.
Okay. Audric Estimate, RB 58.
I'll take Audric Estimate. That's my man.
I can't see a scenario where I feel good about playing Kendre Miller unless there are multiple injuries at the running back position, because if Alvin Kamara is there, he's going to get all the passing down work. We know that Taysom Hill is going to gobble up some short yardage touchdowns, right? And I also just don't love this offense, Kate. Like, if this was a different offense with a much better offensive line and a better quarterback, and I just thought, hey, maybe they could support multiple running backs, I would potentially be in. It's kind of just a team I'm avoiding outside of Chris Olave and Taysom Hill.
I mean, all of that is fair. I just keep going back to this player that we watched at TCU. 90th percentile missed forced tackle rate among running backs that season. 81st percentile gap grade. 98th percentile missed forced tackles per reception. Like, this is the dude that has the quickness. He has speed. He's got the NFL build. Like, I do think he's got a lot of these traits that we really like. I think, in terms of what he was maybe missing is like some decisiveness as a runner. And maybe that's, kind of a big, barrier for him breaking through at the next level. But like, yeah, this one's hard.
I don't
for
feel
me.
good about it. I don't feel good about it.
I don't feel good. I feel like in terms of like panic meter, Kyle Pitts, I'll say, is like a 3. Kendre Miller, I'm full on 8, 9.
Yeah.
We're approaching 10.
All right, okay, let's talk about the Bears running backs, because we saw a heavy amount of Roschon Johnson and Khalil Herbert in the Hall of Fame game, which isn't a great sign. Let's talk about their dynasty values next. This episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. What are your self-care non-negotiables? Maybe you never skip leg day. Maybe you always have to go on a morning walk like I do. But when your schedule is packed with kids' activity, big work projects, and more, it's easy to let your priorities slip. Even though we know it makes us happy, it's hard to make time for it. But when you feel like you have no time for yourself, non-negotiables like therapy are more important than ever. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's done entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. All you have to do is fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for any reason at no additional charge. Never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That is BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. Every dayers on Wednesday's show, we're going to have Matt Williamson from the Peacock and Williamson show and from his new YouTube channel to answer your mailbag questions. We're going to talk about training camp. We'll talk about the preseason. Maybe we'll talk about some Brandon Ayuk rumors if those are still going on, which please, I just want this to be done. That's all. Just please be done. But okay, let's finish up with the Bears running backs here. They signed DeAndre Swift on the first day of free agency this year, to be their every down workhorse running back. But the competition to be the RB2 has been fascinating. In the Hall of Fame game, we saw Roschon Johnson start that game, got a lot of work early, actually looked pretty good. And then it was Khalil Herbert coming in the second and third quarters. But I don't love that both of those players are playing in the Hall of Fame game. It makes me a little nervous.
In the Hall of Fame game, that's like an absolute no-go for me. But I have to wonder, like, what is the purpose of them playing in the Hall of Fame game? Because even if you're saying like y'all are the backup running backs, right? Which I think that's kind of, we knew that already. Like, this is not a surprise to us. But even if they're saying you two are our backup running backs, you're down the depth chart, they already know who these players are, which I think that's why I had the biggest question of like, why are they still playing? They know Khalil Herbert. They know exactly what type of running back he is. Maybe Roshan Johnson, you have more questions about in general, just because he's younger, but like Khalil Herbert, he's on the final year of his rookie deal. Like he's gotten a good amount of playing time. And to this point, like he's actually been a pretty solid NFL running back. Like he can break through contact. Like he's a strong NFL running back that I've really, really liked to this point. Is there any world where they're putting these two running backs out there as a little bit of a showcase? Maybe because it felt like there was kind of this like there's embarrassment of riches everywhere on the Bears offense right now, but like could they be moving on from one of these guys via trade and they want to get some extra eyes on some of the talent they have on their depth chart?
Yes, I think the answer is yes. Now, I don't think it's Roshan. I actually think the reason that Roshan played in the Hall of Fame game is because he just hasn't had a lot of live reps at running back, right? Like, go back to his time at Texas. He was playing behind Bijan Robinson his entire career. And then last year, he played quite a bit, but not a ton. I think they were just more trying to get him ready to become the every down RB2 for this team. Now, Khalil Herbert's played a lot, right? He played a lot at Virginia Tech. He played a lot early in his career. Like, the Bears know what he is, or at least they should know what he is. I do think they were trying to showcase him a little bit. It's Khalil Herbert going into the final year of his contract. Roshan's only in year 2. I think it makes sense to hold on to Roshan Johnson, right? You have this very good running back on a cheap contract. Could they try to flip Khalil Herbert for a mid to late round pick? Maybe. But I think of those two running backs, Herbert is the one that's the most likely to be moved.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think what we're probably going to see if they do move on from Khalil Herbert, because I do think like just the style of running back, like I don't really see Khalil Herbert as a great RB3. He's a great depth piece, but I think, in general, not the most overly dynamic dude that's going to be on the field every single play. I just think they can probably there's another team that could utilize his skill set, I think, a little bit more effectively. Now, if we're looking at the ADPs for these running backs, obviously DeAndre Swift at the top of the pack, RB20 in the latest batch of Dynasty ADP over at Dynasty League Football. Then you have Roshan Johnson, RB48, Khalil Herbert, RB57. Now, Khalil Herbert, 26 years old, you mentioned in the final year of his contract, but probably more
26
likely
already?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But to be fair, 26, but not necessarily a ton of miles on the tires. But yeah, 26. But he does probably have an easier pathway to maybe some consistent production if they orchestrate a trade. Like if Khalil Herbert, let's say, is traded to the Dallas Cowboys, because I just
Great.
need the Dallas Cowboys to get a running back. Like that would be very intriguing to me. What landing spots do you think would raise Khalil Herbert's dynasty value the most? Because I don't think he's going to probably lose a ton more, being how late he's being drafted. But like, where could he win?
Dallas is the obvious one, right? I think the Chargers are an obvious one too, because Dobbins and Gus Edwards are not the most durable running backs, right? After that, it gets a little tricky.
What about the Giants? Or do
Yeah,
you
I
think
mean,
they're all in with Singletary?
they love Motor Singletary. They also drafted Tyrone Tracy, who is he's a former receiver that has some athleticism. But if they just wanted to get a little bit better there, I could see that. I'm trying to think. There's just not very many starting running back jobs available. I mean, I could see like a team like the Chiefs throwing a 6th-round pick at Khalil Herbert and being like, he's just so much better than Clyde Edwards-Helaire and the other running backs that we have on our team. And Isaiah Pacheco, we love him, but he's not been the most durable guy. This just brings up our floor. But I think the path to him getting a bunch of touches, I don't really see it outside of Probably Dallas.
What's the most? Would you send anything in a
No.
trade for Khalil
No.
Herbert at this time?
No.
How about Roshan Johnson?
Yeah, I would be more willing to trade for Roshan because I do think first of all, he's higher in the depth chart. He's 3 years younger. And it's not like DeAndre Swift has been the most durable running back through his career, right? Like that's why the Eagles got him so cheap in the 2023 season, right? Is because he
Had
has
a
had
bunch
a
of
hard
shoulder
time.
issues.
Yeah, exactly. I also think he's a different type of running back. And he is a different type of running back that even if Swift is healthy, I think they can find a role for Roshan as a, between the tackles runner. Maybe they use him more in the goal line situations, but I think Roshan has a much easier path to touches than Khalil Herbert.
So are you officially out on Khalil Herbert in
Yes.
Dynasty?
Yes.
Just to be okay.
Yeah. And it bums me out
Ooh.
because 2 years ago, all in on Khalil Herbert. I thought he looked fantastic during his rookie season, but I don't know. It just has not.
It's odd. I do feel like every time I've watched Khalil Herbert play football, I'm impressed. Like
Yeah. He's a good
it's
player.
really hard because I do feel like there's a mismatch in terms of like where he's fit into this roster in terms of what's actually happening and their lack of investment in him versus what you see on the field, because he has been a pretty efficient and reliable running back.
He's a viable NFL running back. And there are some
Yeah.
teams out there that need a viable NFL running back. I just don't know if they're going to make that trade for Khalil Herbert, if they're going to roll with what they have. A lot of these teams are very hesitant to give up draft capital for 1-year rentals unless it's a significantly better player than their starter. I view Khalil Herbert. I'm going to use Dallas as an example. I view Khalil Herbert as an upgrade on Ezekiel Elliott and Rico Dowdle. I don't know if the Cowboys do, and the Cowboys would probably just hold on to the draft picks at that point.
Crazy.
I know.
That's wild.
Yeah. All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Dynasty Football your first listen today. Now go listen to the Locked On Fantasy Football podcast. Get daily insight to the best fantasy draft strategies so that you can absolutely dominate your league this season. You can find the link to Locked On Fantasy Football in the descriptions, so you don't even need to search. We're making this easy on you. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure you're checking out the Locked On Dynasty Football podcast on YouTube. We post videos every single day over there. Make sure that you're following Kate on Twitter at Kate Majuk, and make sure you're reading her work at Yahoo Fantasy. I'm at Marcus_Mosier, and we will see you right back here tomorrow with an episode with Matt Williamson.